She stared down at the tiny newborns wrapped in hospital blankets, their eyes wide, innocent, full of life. And without a second thought, she turned her back. Margaret Collins, a powerful white CEO known for building empires and breaking glass ceilings, made a decision that day that would haunt her for the next 2 decades. She refused to help raise her own sister's black twin babies, fearing the backlash, the questions, and the image it would reflect on her pristine reputation. But fate has a way of circling back. 20 years later, those same children she cast aside would return, not for revenge, but for something far more powerful. As leaders of the hottest tech startup in America, they would stand face to face with the woman who once chose her career over compassion. And this time, the world would be watching. What happened between that hospital room and the stock exchange bell is a story you'll never forget. Margaret Collins wasn't just any CEO, she was a symbol. Flawless in interviews, relentless in the boardroom, and hailed by Forbes as one of the most powerful women in tech. Margaret had spent her life crafting an image of perfection. Every move she made was calculated, every detail curated to protect her brand. The brilliant self-made woman who conquered Silicon Valley with grace and grit. But behind the tailored suits and keynote speeches, there was a different truth. One she'd buried so deep, she thought it would never resurface. That truth began 20 years ago with a phone call she never expected. It was from her younger sister, Sarah, the free spirit of the family, always a little too wild, a little too bold, a little too unpredictable for Margaret's taste. Sarah was calling from a hospital room in Brooklyn, her voice fragile and trembling. She had just given birth to twins, a boy and a girl, premature, tiny and beautiful. But something in her voice said more. There was hesitation, panic, and then silence. And then came the words that would change everything. "Margaret, I need help, please. I can't do this alone." Margaret's heart skipped, but not out of love, out of fear. She cleared her throat. "Where's the father?" she asked. But she already knew the answer. Sarah had dated a black man, someone Margaret never met, someone the family never approved of, someone who had now vanished. "They're his," Sarah whispered, voice cracking. "But he's gone. I need someone, just until I can figure things out." The line went quiet, and for a moment Margaret felt something stir, guilt maybe, compassion. But it didn't last long. Her mind raced with consequences. Her image, her investors, the gossip columns, the stockholders, the press. "I can't," she replied sharply, trying to sound firm, not cold. "I have the board this week. The IPO announcement's next month. You know how much I've built." "They're babies, Margaret," Sarah interrupted, her voice suddenly fierce. "They're your niece and nephew, just for a little while." But the plea fell flat. "I'm sorry," Margaret said, colder now, like a closing elevator door. "I just can't. This is my life." She hung up. And with that, the fate of two innocent children was sealed, not by chance but by choice. Sarah, already struggling with postpartum depression and health complications, was overwhelmed. Days later, the twins were taken into temporary foster care while Sarah remained hospitalized. There was no safety net. No family stepped forward. And Margaret, she flew back to San Francisco that same day, took a meeting with investors, smiled for the camera, and pretended nothing had happened. But something had, something deep, something irreversible. Margaret would go on to grow her empire, appear on magazine covers, give TED Talks about empowering the next generation, all while keeping that chapter of her life sealed away like a locked drawer. The press called her fearless, she called herself focused, but the truth, she was running from shame, from responsibility, from two faces she tried hard not to remember. And those twins, they were given names by the hospital's social worker. Malik and Maya. No middle names, no baby pictures, no family history. They entered the foster system not as beloved infants but as case numbers. And as Margaret built her billion-dollar empire, those children spent their first nights in government cribs, wrapped not in silk but in institutional blankets, forgotten by the very blood meant to protect them. People like Margaret rarely get asked about the things they leave behind. The world celebrates winners, not what they sacrifice to win. But life has a strange rhythm. What you push away, what you deny, what you abandon, sometimes it doesn't just return. Sometimes it grows stronger than you ever imagined. Malik and Maya Johnson's earliest memories were not of lullabies or bedtime stories, but of transitions from one stranger's house to another, from one school to the next, from one temporary family to a new set of rules. By the time they were 4, they had already lived in 6 different homes. The world around them moved like a conveyor belt, and they were passengers with no control, no map, and no real destination. No one explained why their mother had disappeared. No one told them why their skin seemed to make some people uncomfortable. And certainly, no one mentioned an aunt named Margaret who lived across the country in a glass office tower, sitting at the top of the world. What Malik and Maya learned from a very young age was that belonging was something you had to earn, and sometimes, even when you did, it could still be taken away. Their first real foster family, the Parkers, kept them for 7 months, long enough for Maya to start calling Mrs. Parker Mommy and for Malik to feel safe enough to sleep without his shoes on. But then came the call. "The county's moving them again," Mr. Parker said one night at dinner, not even looking them in the eyes. Malik never forgot the way his stomach dropped, like the world just unhooked itself. Again. It was the same feeling every time. Bags packed in silence, goodbyes without promises, car rides with social workers who never asked what music they liked. But they adapted. They had to. Maya learned to be charming, a people-pleaser with big eyes and an even bigger smile. Malik became quiet, analytical, always watching, always calculating the safest way to be invisible. They protected each other. When Maya got bullied in 2nd grade for the color of her skin, Malik stepped in and got suspended. When Malik stopped talking altogether for almost a year, it was Maya who read books to him every night just to fill the silence. It wasn't all bleak. There were moments, stolen glimmers of light in the darkness. A teacher who stayed after class to help Malik with math. A volunteer who gave Maya her first sketchbook. A librarian who taught them that books could be windows and mirrors, ways to see the world and themselves differently. But the system was cold, overburdened, and underfunded. They were often given second-hand clothes, outdated textbooks, and meals that tasted more like survival than nourishment. Holidays came and went, sometimes marked by a donated gift or a church charity event, but rarely with the kind of warmth you see in Christmas movies. Still, they kept going, because deep down, in places they didn't have words for, they believed that maybe, just maybe, life had something better waiting. That something better arrived when they were 9, in the form of a middle-aged couple named Denise and Carl Johnson. They lived in a modest home in Queens, worked long hours. Denise was a nurse. Carl drove a city bus, but they had love. The kind that didn't shout or show off, but wrapped around you like a warm coat in the winter. From the beginning, the Johnsons did something radical. They asked Malik and Maya who they were, what they liked, what scared them. They didn't treat them like broken things to be fixed, but like seeds that needed time, light, and space. They gave them structure, curfews, chores, Sunday church, but they also gave them space to grow. Maya got her first real art class. Malik got his first computer. For the first time, they had stability. For the first time, they could breathe. Malik was obsessed with patterns. He'd take apart old electronics just to see how they worked, fascinated by logic and code. Denise noticed this and scraped together money to buy him a refurbished laptop. That computer became his universe. He taught himself programming from YouTube tutorials and free online courses. While other kids played video games, Malik was teaching himself how to build them. Maya, meanwhile, blossomed in science and design. She was the kind of student teachers remembered, curious, articulate, and fiercely determined. But it wasn't just academics that defined them. It was their resilience, sharpened by years of instability, and their bond, unshakable, forged by fire. Still, questions lingered. Who were their parents? Why had no one ever come for them? One night when they were 13, Maya asked Denise directly, her voice quiet, almost embarrassed. Denise hesitated. Your mother, she struggled, more than anyone should have had to, and your aunt, she wasn't ready to help. That was all she said, but the word stayed. Your aunt. That's when the pieces started to fall into place, the hospital paperwork, the silence, the refusal. Malik found an old document in his case file. Margaret E. Collins, emergency contact, declined placement. He didn't know what it meant at first, but when he searched the name years later and found the face of a tech billionaire smiling on the cover of Business Weekly, something cracked inside him. But they didn't spiral, they didn't lash out, they just got sharper, more focused. We build our own table, Maya said once after winning a regional science award. If they won't make room for us, we'll design the whole building. That became their philosophy. By high school, Malik and Maya were local legends, honor students, scholarship winners, respected by teachers, admired by peers. But they never lost their edge. Their past wasn't a wound anymore, it was a forge. Malik launched his first app at 16, an AI-powered tutoring tool for underfunded schools. Maya worked with community organizers to redesign civic tech interfaces for foster youth. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were building, creating, leading. And somewhere far across the country, the woman who once turned her back on two crying newborns had no idea that the future she was praying for was already carrying her legacy, not in her name, but in the brilliance of the lives she tried to erase. College wasn't just an opportunity for Malik and Maya. It was a battlefield, a stage, and a rocket launch all at once. They didn't walk onto those ivy-covered campuses with legacy names or alumni connections. They walked in with scars hidden behind scholarship papers, with minds sharpened by struggle, and with a fire most of their peers couldn't even imagine. Malik got accepted to MIT on a full ride for engineering, while Maya chose Stanford, majoring in human-centered AI with a focus on ethical systems. The twins parted ways for the first time in their lives, but only physically. They stayed connected through late-night calls, endless ideas, and a shared dream neither of them had fully put into words yet. Both understood one thing. They weren't just here to succeed. They were here to build something that couldn't be ignored. Malik was quiet on campus, but quickly became known in niche circles. The kid who didn't just write clean code but wrote systems that understood people. He interned at big-name firms but always left disillusioned. He saw how algorithms sorted resumes based on racial markers, how facial recognition struggled with darker skin tones, and how AI, praised as neutral, often baked in decades of prejudice. He didn't just want to patch those systems. He wanted to rebuild them from the ground up. Maya, on the other hand, flourished as a communicator, charismatic, driven, and able to translate deeply technical ideas into compelling visions. She challenged professors, organized debates on AI bias, and began mentoring young black girls in STEM programs. Her TEDx talk on designing fairness in machine intelligence went viral. People called her a rising star. She didn't care. She and Malik had already started laying the groundwork for something bigger. They called it new code. It started as a side project, a decentralized platform designed to audit AI decision-making in real time. Then it evolved. Malik built the engine. Maya built the movement. What began in dorm rooms grew into late-night coding sessions, messy whiteboards, and pitch decks sent to skeptical investors. They got rejection after rejection. Too young, too idealistic, too risky. But they'd been underestimated their whole lives. And this time they weren't alone. They began attracting other brilliant outliers: a queer data scientist from Atlanta, a neurodiverse UX designer, a South Asian engineer who'd been passed over one too many times at big tech. By their mid-twenties, Malik and Maya weren't just building a product. They were creating a new culture of innovation, one that didn't ask people to hide who they were, but leveraged it. Their big break came when a major investigative journalist published a story titled, "When AI Says No: The Hidden Discrimination of Code." In the article, Malik's early research was cited as proof that some hiring platforms had systematically filtered out applicants with ethnic names. Public outrage exploded. Tech companies scrambled. New code became the answer no one knew they needed. Within weeks, they secured $12 million in seed funding. Maya took the stage at TechCrunch Disrupt, electrifying the crowd with this line: "If old systems built injustice into their source code, we're not here to patch them, we're here to write a whole new language." The company grew fast, but Malik and Maya stayed grounded. They gave equity to every team member. They opened offices in underserved communities. They implemented a radical transparency model, even publishing their algorithms' audit trail for public scrutiny. Critics called them naive. The industry called them disruptive. But the public called them the future. Meanwhile, on the other side of the country, the woman whose last name they had quietly buried beneath a new one was struggling to stay ahead. Margaret Collins, once untouchable, now fading. Her tech empire, Collinex, was still afloat, but barely. Her platforms were outdated, her leadership team stagnant, her public image no longer shining with innovation but dulled by controversy. Employees leaked memos about toxic culture. Articles questioned her company's lack of diversity. Young talent passed them over. And still, Margaret refused to step down. She clung to the empire she built with white-knuckled pride, unwilling to admit the industry had evolved past her. She first heard of new code through an internal email. "Potential acquisition target," the subject line read. She skimmed the attached pitch deck, clean, modern, unapologetically bold. The founders' names caught her attention: Malik and Maya Johnson. Her breath hitched. Johnson, her sister's married name. Her sister, Sarah. The name she hadn't spoken out loud in nearly 2 decades. Margaret closed her office door, heart racing. She opened another browser and searched their names. Their faces stared back at her, confident, radiant, impossibly familiar. Maya had Sarah's eyes. Malik had the same dimpled chin as her own father. She dropped into her leather chair, the blood draining from her face. They were hers, not biologically, but undeniably, her niece, her nephew. The children she had refused in a hospital hallway 2 decades earlier were now the very force disrupting the industry she once ruled. She felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years: panic. Not over her company, not over her shareholders, but over something far more personal: the weight of a choice she had buried under decades of success. She tried to brush it off. She told herself it was coincidence. But then came the email from her head of acquisitions. "Johnson twins are open to partnership talks. They're leading the next wave. We either work with them or get left behind." Margaret stared at the screen. She hadn't spoken to her sister since that day in the hospital. She had never tried to find the twins, never sent a card or asked a question. She had erased them. But now she would have to face them not as children in need, but as leaders, innovators, and visionaries who held the key to her company's survival. She didn't know it yet, but what was coming wasn't just a negotiation. It was a reckoning. The email sat in Margaret's inbox for hours before she dared to open it again. The subject line was simple: New Code Acquisition Opportunity. Urgent. She had read it already twice, but something about it felt radioactive. Her eyes kept drifting back to those names, Malik and Maya Johnson. She tried convincing herself it was a coincidence. Johnson was a common name, after all. It didn't have to mean anything. But deep down, she knew. There was a chill in her chest that refused to leave, the same numbness she felt the day she walked out of that hospital room, telling herself she was doing the right thing, that success came first, that appearances mattered more than people. Now, 20 years later, those same children had become the architects of a future she could no longer control. And worse, they didn't need her. She needed them. Her company, Kalinex, had been bleeding relevance for years. The once pioneering AI firm had failed to modernize, failed to adapt, and most critically, failed to diversify. Younger generations saw Kalinex as a dinosaur, a relic of a tech era built on exclusivity and hierarchy. Investors were pulling out. Journalists had stopped calling. Even her own board had begun whispering about succession plans behind closed doors. The irony was cruel. She had spent her life climbing to the top, only to find the mountain crumbling beneath her feet. And now, the only lifeline left came from two faces she had chosen not to love. She finally picked up her phone and dialed her assistant. "Set up a call," she said, trying to sound steady. "With new code, I want to speak with the founders directly." Her voice cracked slightly on the word founders. She cleared her throat. "Soon, before they go public." The call was arranged 3 days later. Margaret sat in her office, her hair pulled back tight, makeup flawless, posture perfect, the armor she'd worn for decades. But as the video call connected, her breath caught. There they were. Maya, radiant and poised, seated in a light-filled room with minimalist decor, calm and confident. Malik, quieter, more reserved, but with eyes that scanned everything, even through the screen. For a brief second, Margaret felt like the past was pressing its hand against the glass, demanding to be acknowledged. Maya offered a polite smile. "We're just getting started." There was a silence, brief but heavy, before Margaret continued. "I wanted to explore the possibility of a partnership. Kalinex is in a transitional phase, and your technology aligns with what we believe is the future of ethical AI." She spoke like a textbook, defaulting to corporate polish, but she could see it wasn't landing. Maya's expression remained unreadable. Malik didn't say a word. "We appreciate your interest," Maya said finally, "but we're not looking to be absorbed. We're looking to lead." Her voice didn't waver. "We're preparing for IPO." Margaret leaned in slightly. "I understand, but an IPO can be volatile, especially in this climate. I can offer you legacy infrastructure, global distribution, and a level of stability your investors might find reassuring." It was Malik who spoke next, his voice deeper and more deliberate than she expected. "Legacy is why we exist. It's what we've spent our whole lives cleaning up." The words hit her like a quiet slap. She looked at him more closely now. His jawline, his eyes. That crease in his brow, her father had the same one when he read the newspaper. She could barely breathe. "You know who I am, don't you?" she asked softly. Maya's eyes locked with hers, steady, unblinking. "We've always known." And there it was, the moment she had dreaded and deserved. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was judgmental, earned. "I was young," she started to say, then stopped herself. "No, that wouldn't work. Not here, not now." "I made a mistake," she said instead. "A terrible one. I thought I was doing what I had to do to survive in my world. But the truth is, I was afraid. Afraid of what people would think, of how it would affect my image, my career, my success. And I've regretted it every single day. Maya inhaled long and slow. That's the thing about regret. It's always about you, what you lost, what you feel, not about the people left behind. Malik nodded slightly. We're not here to heal your guilt, Miss Collins. We're not angry. We just moved on. We built without you. That sentence, "we built without you," landed like a final verdict. Margaret wanted to say more. She wanted to explain, to rewind, to find the version of herself that could have been better. But time doesn't offer reruns, only consequences. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said quietly. Maya stood, gently closing her laptop. "We're not in the business of forgiveness. We're in the business of the future. Good luck, Ms. Collins." The screen went black. Margaret sat still for several minutes. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass of the powered-down screen. The same face that once walked away from two babies, now looking at the grown revolution she couldn't stop. Outside, the world was changing. Headlines were starting to buzz. New code prepares landmark IPO, the future of ethical AI. Investors were shifting. The media was watching. And somewhere in that wave of rising possibility, her past had come back not to destroy her, but to prove that she had never been necessary to begin with. She had walked away from them thinking they would disappear. Instead, they became the very future she had tried to control. And fate doesn't knock. It breaks the door down. 1 week after the tense call, Margaret Collins did something she hadn't done in over 20 years. She asked for an in-person meeting with Maya and Malik Johnson. Not to negotiate a deal, not to pitch a partnership, but to confront something far more uncomfortable, the truth. Surprisingly, they agreed with one condition. The meeting would take place on their turf, in New Code's Brooklyn headquarters, and it would last no more than 1 hour. No formalities, no handlers, no scripts. Margaret arrived precisely at 9:00 a.m. No security detail, no luxury suit, just a plain black coat and a face that looked older than it had in her most recent Forbes feature. Her confidence, once her shield, seemed to soften in the warmth of the open, minimalist space. There was no polished marble floor, no cold glass conference table. Instead, sunlight filtered through big windows, bouncing off a whiteboard scrawled with code with purpose in bright, handwritten letters. The walls were decorated with sketches, not stock art, plants, post-it notes, humanity. Malik was already waiting, leaning casually against the edge of a standing desk. Maya entered shortly after, holding a mug of coffee and an unreadable expression. They didn't greet her like family. They didn't greet her like enemies either. They greeted her like professionals, cautious, composed, and prepared for whatever came next. For several seconds, no one said a word. Then Margaret spoke. "Thank you for letting me come. I know I don't have the right to ask for your time, but I need to say a few things, and I'll respect whatever choice you make after." She sat down, her hands trembling just slightly. "I know what I did. I know I left 2 children when they needed family the most. I told myself it was to protect my reputation, to protect what I built. But the truth is, I was just afraid. Afraid of what the world would think of me. Of raising children who didn't look like me. Of being associated with a story that wasn't clean or controlled. I walked away from you, and I've lived with that guilt every day since." The silence was heavy. Not hostile, just full of weight, full of years. Maya's voice was calm but steely. "You didn't just walk away, you erased us." Margaret looked down. "Yes," she whispered. Then Malik spoke, his voice low and deliberate. "We weren't orphans, Margaret. You made us orphans." It was a sentence she would never forget, not for the way it sounded, but for the way it felt. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said after a long pause. "I don't deserve it. I just wanted to face you not as a CEO, as a person, as your aunt who failed you." Maya slowly sat down across from her. "You want to face us now because we're successful. Because we're the future of a space you're no longer welcome in." "I won't deny that part of this is fear," Margaret admitted. "Fear of being left behind. But it's also hope. Hope that maybe, by showing up, I can begin to take responsibility." There was a long pause. Malik studied her, measured, analytical. Maya looked away briefly, then back again. "We don't need closure from you," Maya said. "We've built our own path without apology. We don't want your control, your money, or your shadow cast over our work." "I'm not here to take anything," Margaret said. "I don't want seats on your board. I don't want credit. I want to support you, however you allow. If that means standing back, I'll stand back. If that means making introductions or clearing obstacles with regulators, I'll do it quietly, without strings." It wasn't a pitch, it was a confession. Maya looked at her for a long moment. "We're not in the business of healing family wounds. We're building systems that don't let wounds like ours happen again." Malik nodded. "This isn't personal for us, it's structural. We're not interested in forgiveness. We're interested in impact." And yet something shifted. Attention lifted, even slightly. For the first time, they saw Margaret not as the polished mogul in a magazine, but as a flawed human being reckoning with a lifetime of silence. "We'll think about your offer," Maya said finally. "Not for you, for the people this company serves." Margaret stood slowly, nodded. "That's more than fair, thank you, truly." As she walked out of the building, she passed a mural near the exit, photos of New Code team members. Smiling, diverse, brilliant. In the center was a quote in bold black ink, "Built by those who were told they didn't belong." She stared at it for a long moment, the reflection of her own face faint in the glass. There was no redemption in this story, no reunions, no tearful hugs, only reality and the quiet power of people who rose not in spite of abandonment but through it. And for Margaret, that was perhaps the most honest ending she could hope for. The morning of the IPO arrived with a sky the color of steel, thick with New York humidity and anticipation. Inside the bustling floor of the New York Stock Exchange, cameras flashed, investors murmured, and screens pulsed with the name that had taken Silicon Valley by storm: New Code Technologies. At the center of it all stood Malik and Maya Johnson, not as underdogs, not as survivors, but as leaders of one of the most anticipated tech public offerings in the last decade. Dressed simply but sharply, the twins stood poised beside the ceremonial bell, surrounded by a sea of employees, mentors, and community leaders, most of them young, diverse, and brimming with pride. And watching from the far edge of the floor, tucked behind a cluster of journalists, was Margaret Collins. She hadn't asked for a front-row seat. She didn't want a spotlight. She stood quietly in the back, a ghost in her own industry, witnessing the moment that would redefine the landscape she once dominated. Her eyes never left them, Malik with his calm confidence, Maya with her fiery grace. They didn't acknowledge her presence, but they didn't need to. This moment wasn't about reconciliation. It was about arrival. As the countdown began, 10, 9, 8, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. With each second, Margaret felt something loosen in her chest, a kind of grief she had long suppressed rising slowly to the surface. She had spent her life chasing legacy, building a brand, winning admiration. But here, now, it was painfully clear. Legacy wasn't in empires. It was in people. And these two people, the ones she had walked away from, had done what she never could: lead without fear, without compromise, without needing to hide who they were. The bell rang, cheers erupted, confetti flew, and on every screen across the stock exchange flashed one name: New Code. The stock price surged instantly. Reporters scrambled. Phones rang off the hook. Maya raised her fist slightly in victory. Malik smiled with quiet triumph. Around them, team members embraced, crying, laughing, some speechless. Margaret remained still, her lips parted slightly in awe. It wasn't just a company going public. It was a generation stepping forward. And somewhere, deep inside the woman who once said no to two newborns, a new voice whispered, not in regret, not in apology, but in truth. They never needed me, but I needed to see this, to know they made it, to know the world still turns toward justice even when we don't. Then she turned and walked away, not defeated, but finally at peace. Long after the IPO celebrations faded, after the headlines had cooled and the cameras turned to the next big thing, the story of Malik and Maya Johnson lingered. Not because they were prodigies, or because they built a billion-dollar company, but because of what they represented. Their rise wasn't just a victory of intellect or innovation. It was the quiet, determined defiance of a system that told them they didn't belong. It was what happens when the overlooked stop waiting for permission, when the abandoned refuse to carry bitterness and instead build brilliance. For every child who's been passed over, for every brilliant mind dismissed because of the color of their skin, their background, their last name, New Code wasn't just a company. It was a signal flare, a declaration: we are here, we are capable, we are leading. In interviews, Maya often avoided talking about the past. But in one rare moment, months after the IPO, she said softly, "I don't wake up thinking about who didn't raise us. I wake up thinking about who we're raising through our work. That's where the power is now." Malik added in his calm, engineer's tone, "Code doesn't lie, but the people behind it can. Our mission was never revenge, it was repair." And Margaret, she quietly retired. She stepped down from Collinex without fanfare, declined all press interviews, and declined a seat on New Code's advisory board when Maya offered it as a gesture, not of forgiveness, but of closure. She knew her role now, to bear witness, to support from afar the lives that had grown beyond the story she once tried to control. In one of her last public talks, she said, "Leadership isn't about legacy. It's about knowing when to leave space for something better." This story isn't rare because it's dramatic. It's rare because it was given a chance to continue, because the twins didn't become a tragedy but a triumph. And that was no accident. It came from resilience, from community, from the rare moments when people step up, like the Johnsons who adopted them, the teachers who nurtured them, the mentors who saw beyond their pasts. But it also leaves us with a question. How many Malik and Mayas never got their chance? How many futures were lost because someone chose silence over courage, pride over compassion, image over action? The system still fails children every day. Bias still shapes opportunity. But stories like this remind us not everything broken must stay broken. Healing doesn't always look like reunions. Sometimes it looks like revolutions. So if you've ever looked away, it's not too late to look again. If you've ever stayed silent, it's not too late to speak. And if you've ever felt forgotten, know this: you are not your origin story. You are what you choose to build next.